A few weeks ago, the idea of a direct war between the United States and Iran stopped sounding hypothetical. American officials were talking about hitting Iran's military capabilities and limiting its ability to threaten the region. Iran, meanwhile, was making it clear that it would not simply back down under pressure. Oil markets reacted. Diplomats rushed to contain the situation. And once again, the world was forced to ask a familiar and frightening question. What happens if the United States and Iran stop fighting indirectly and begin fighting each other head-on? But now, a different question is starting to emerge. What if the most dangerous phase is already passing? What if this crisis, which looked like it could spiral into something much bigger, is instead reaching its natural limit? Because despite the threats, despite the military pressure, and despite the history of hostility between them, there are several powerful reasons to believe this conflict may not keep expanding. Not because the two countries suddenly trust each other, not because the core issues have been solved, but because both sides may already understand how devastating a real war would be. And that is where this story begins. To understand why this war could be ending, we first need to define what that actually means. The United States and Iran are not allies. They are not partners. They do not even have normal diplomatic relations. For more than 4 decades, their relationship has been shaped by sanctions, proxy conflicts, military threats, covert actions, and repeated moments of crisis. So when people say the war could be ending, they usually do not mean the rivalry is over. They mean that this latest round of escalation may be approaching a ceiling. And that matters because a direct war between the United States and Iran would not stay limited to those two countries. It could pull in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, the Gulf states, Israel, global shipping routes, and the world economy. That is exactly why both sides have so often tried to appear strong without crossing into a war they cannot control. And that same logic may be returning again now. The first reason this war could be ending is simple. Neither side can be certain that escalation would remain limited if it goes much further. For the United States, a war with Iran would not be quick or simple. Iran is a large country with a significant population, missile capabilities, regional partners, and a strategic position near some of the most important energy routes in the world. Even if the United States could inflict massive damage, the wider consequences could be severe. There could be attacks on shipping, missile strikes across the region, disruption to oil flows, cyber attacks, and pressure on American allies and military positions. For Iran, the danger is just as serious. The United States still has enormous military advantages in air power, naval power, intelligence, and long-range strike capability. Iran could make a war painful, but it also knows that a prolonged direct conflict with the United States could threaten major parts of its military, economy, and state infrastructure. So both sides may still want leverage, both sides may still want deterrence, but neither side has a strong reason to gamble on an unlimited war. That does not create peace, but it does create restraint. The second reason this war could be ending is that diplomacy has not completely disappeared. Even during moments of major tension, both countries have often relied on indirect communication, intermediaries, and back-channel signals. They may not trust each other, but they do understand the value of leaving a door open. That matters because countries that still believe in some kind of off-ramp are less likely to keep escalating blindly. This does not mean a grand peace deal is coming. It simply means both sides may still recognize the same basic truth. It is much easier to start a larger war than it is to stop one. And once both governments fully understand that, the search for an exit becomes more attractive. The third reason this war could be ending is the nuclear issue. Ironically, one of the biggest reasons people fear war is also one of the biggest reasons the fighting may stop short. Iran's nuclear program has remained one of the central points of tension for years. The United States does not want Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon. Iran, meanwhile, sees its nuclear program as both a source of leverage and a symbol of sovereignty. That makes the situation extremely dangerous, but it also makes both sides more careful. If the United States escalates too far, it could trigger exactly the kind of response it wants to prevent, pushing Iran to move even faster toward a nuclear deterrent. And if Iran escalates too far, It risks inviting attacks specifically designed to damage the facilities and systems that protect its long-term strategic position. So the nuclear issue does not just increase the danger of war, it also increases the incentive to stop short of one. Because once direct fighting begins, the pressure on both sides becomes much harder to control. The fourth reason this war could be ending is economics. A direct US-Iran conflict would not only be fought with missiles and aircraft, it would also be fought through oil, shipping, insurance, trade routes, and market panic. Iran sits near the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important maritime choke points on the planet. Even limited disruption there can send shockwaves through global energy markets. That gives Iran leverage, but it also creates a limit. If Iran pushes too far, it risks turning more of the world against it by threatening the global economy. And for the United States, a major regional war would bring its own economic costs. Higher oil prices, political backlash, pressure from allies, and broader market instability could all become part of the price. In other words, this kind of war would not stay far away from ordinary people. It would show up in fuel prices, inflation, shipping costs, headlines, elections, and public frustration. And when both sides understand that, the desire to keep escalating becomes weaker. Another reason this war could be ending is political. In many crises, leaders keep pushing forward because they believe backing down would make them look weak. But sometimes tensions ease when both sides feel they have already made their point. The United States can argue that it has shown military reach, strategic resolve, and the willingness to act under pressure. Iran can argue that it stood firm, refused to submit, and survived intense external pressure without collapsing. That may sound like spin, because it is, but spin matters. If both sides can present themselves at home as strong, then de-escalation becomes easier. They do not need to like each other. They just need a version of events that allows them to step back without looking defeated. There is also a historical reason to think this war could be ending. The United States and Iran have spent decades moving toward the edge of direct conflict and then stopping just before going too far. That pattern has repeated itself again and again. The danger is real every time. The fear is justified every time. And someday, a miscalculation could absolutely cause a much larger disaster. But history also shows that both governments are familiar with brinkmanship. They know how to threaten, they know how to signal, and very often, they also know when to pause. That does not make the situation safe. It just means there is a long precedent for stopping at the edge. Now, of course, this could still go wrong. A pause is not peace. De-escalation is not trust. And even if this latest crisis cools down, the deeper issues remain unresolved. Iran's nuclear program is still a major source of tension. American sanctions are still in place. Regional armed groups still matter. The security of the Gulf is still fragile, and both governments still view each other with deep suspicion. So yes, this war could be ending, but the confrontation is not, and that distinction is important. Because if this crisis fades without a broader agreement, the next one may come sooner than many people expect. So, is the war between the United States and Iran over? Not in the full sense. Not in the sense of friendship, reconciliation, or a lasting settlement, but in the more immediate sense. The sense that matters when tensions are peaking and the risk of major conflict suddenly feels real. There are real reasons to think the worst phase may already be nearing its end. Both sides have reasons to stop. Both sides have reasons to avoid a larger disaster. And both sides know that once a true war begins, controlling it may become impossible. That may be the most important fact of all, because sometimes wars do not end when enemies make peace. Sometimes they slow down because both sides finally understand the full cost of continuing. And right now, that may be exactly what is happening.